All right, we're recording now. So again, I want to introduce Paula to you. She is from CoSN, and she's going to be doing a CoSN Interoperability Toolkit interactive discussion with you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yay! Well, thanks you everyone for coming. I was a little surprised at how many people had signed up for an 8 a.m. discussion on interoperability, but I realized it was really for the lunch, and you decided to stay. So I'm just, pardon me while I sit down, it's just my notes are here. And there's a few more people than I thought we had, but I just think it's worthwhile to maybe quickly just go around the room to get a sense of what districts, very quickly, what districts you represent in terms of whether you're urban, rural, suburban, and how many students you serve, and then most importantly, any comments that you'd like to make about interoperability. Why did you pick this session for the morning? Are there any initiatives in your districts that you wanted to share, or are there specific issues that you thought maybe a toolkit could help you solve? So if you don't mind starting to the table to the right, just a very quick overview of what your district is like.
Springfield School District.
And I'll just pass this around. Okay, and thank you, Jeff.
Springfield School Districts, 11,000 students, 1,300 staff members.
Okay.
So from Wenatchee, 8,000 kids in the middle of Washington.
Riverdale from Portland, we've got about 650 kids, K-12.
Oregon Department of Education.
You have lots of kids. Okay. Are you also the department? Okay. And your district?
Newburgh School District, 5,000 kids, about 45 minutes south of Portland.
Eugene Full J, 16,500.
Beaverton School District, 41,000. McCoy Jacobson Clackamas ESD, 50 to 60,000 students from rural to urban.
And Don, good morning. Glad you're joining us. Can you tell us a little bit what district you're from, the size of your district, and rural, urban, suburban?
Don Wolfson, Portland Public Schools, 50,000 students, urban.
Estacada School District, we have about 1,750 students, we're rural.
Okay.
Willamette School District, about 850 plus students. I'm Lawson with Northwest Regional ESD. We only have a couple thousand students we support directly, but we are in ESD, so we support about half kids in the state.
Okay. Keeps you busy.
My name is Ned Lindau. I'm with the Google for Education team.
Thank you for joining.
Franklin Pierce Schools in Tacoma, about 8,000 students.
Any guys in Tacoma, or all three? Okay. The Tacoma contingent?
Michelle Green, Eagle Point School, we have 4,000 or shy, and we're anywhere between suburban to rural.
Okay, at the middle table here. Ladies did not escape.
I'm Katie with Highland Public Schools in Seattle area, about 20,000 kids.
I'm Jennifer, Auburn Public Schools, Washington, 17,000.
David McMinnville School District, about 6,800 students.
Kurt Nelson from Westland Wilsonville School District, about 10,000 students, urban, suburban, and rural in our area.
All together, okay.
Willow School District, and we have about 2,600 kids, and very rural.
Rob Gardner, Evergreen School District, about 27,000.
So you really have run the gamut in this room in terms of what the nation looks like, in terms of, I think the smallest number was like under, we had a couple schools, districts under 1,000, and then some pretty far up. No one talked about a particular problem they had on interoperability, so we'll have an opportunity to talk about that a little bit more. Before we sort of get started on this toolkit, are any of you CoSN members? Okay, that's great. As you know, CoSN is a professional association for school system technology leaders, and it represents over 13 million students in school districts nationwide. The mission of CoSN is to empower educational leaders to leverage technology to improve teaching and learning. And of course, to fully leverage technology, it's imperative that the systems districts that are using are interoperable. Before we get to the toolkit, I did want to make you aware of some other resources that we have. CoSN provides thought leadership resources for community and best practices and advocacy tools to help leaders succeed in the digital transformation in a number of areas, not just interoperability. So I encourage you to take a look at some of the other CoSN's offerings. Many are available to members and non-members alike, and the Interoperability Toolkit will be one that's going to be available to all. Since we have a couple other project directors from CoSN besides myself here, I thought maybe Marie and Amy, if you want to talk a little bit about some of the initiatives you've had up.
Sure. Hi, I'm Marie Pianeta. I am a local Oregonian, but I also am the principal for leadership initiatives for CoSN. I run 5 of their initiatives, including one on networking, one on cloud, one on cybersecurity, one on rural districts, and also one that we have used to be leadership for mobile learning, but is now leadership for digital learning. And our focus right now is taking that next step into leadership and saying that it is no longer okay for us as technologists to just say, well, instruction wants us to do X, Y, Z, so we're just going to make sure we have a robust network, but instead that it really is the place for us to take a seat at the table and say, well, actually, technology has a real purpose. It is not going to give us any better outcomes if we don't use it in appropriate ways, such as using student-centered approaches and adaptive software and looking at data and things like that. So that's kind of the focus of all of these initiatives on one layer or another. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Amy McLaughlin, also a local Oregonian, and I am currently heading up a research project to look at the cost of cybersecurity in our school districts, not just what we're currently spending, but what we're not doing. So you will see a survey coming your way in the next week or so, and I'm looking for school districts to talk to about their cybersecurity costs and what you would do if there was funding to be able to do that. Because we know that security is becoming, has been and still is, and will continue to be one of our biggest challenges for protecting our data and our students' privacy. Thanks, Eve.
How many of you have heard or are familiar with Project Unicorn? Okay, so a couple of folks, not too many. It's not a CoSN initiative, but it is an initiative to improve data interoperability in K-12, which is why I wanted to just bring it up here as another resource. It's made up of an alliance of many organizations in the K-12 sector. CoSN is a member of the steering committee, and they have a number of initiatives that you might find useful, so I just want to let you be aware of those. They launched, I want to say about 2 years ago, with a district pledge. The intent of the pledge was to signal a district's commitment to improve both the security and the impact of student data. They have since added a pledge specific to vendors so that they could do the same. The district pledge basically has 5 tenets. The first, provide digital learning environments for teachers, students, and families. Educate our communities about data privacy, advocate for data interoperability, adopt and integrate data interoperability standards for our technology use, and provide access to quality digital infrastructure. CoSN encourages our members to demonstrate their commitment to providing secure access to student data and improving educational impact by signing the Unicorn Pledge. So I just wanted to share that with you. If any of you want to take a look at that or are interested in maybe having your district sign it, there is those are the links there to via QR code or URL. If you do go to the Project Unicorn page, I want to encourage you to take a look at their resource pages. They've organized links relevant to resources of various organizations, all of the ones that you see there. They break it into 3 stakeholder groupings. So there's a section of resources just for teachers, there's one for school leaders, and there's one for vendors. The page for school leaders groups links under the categories EdTech buying. They actually have a tool that will actually vet tech products to see where they are in the interoperability continuum. They also have tools for privacy and security, as does CoSN, and they have some tools on policy. Some of the resources that they link to are actually CoSN's, and we have 2 existing documents on interoperability that you may want to take a look at. They'll be incorporated into the toolkit, but they are available now. The first is a primer on interoperability education standards. The primer covers interoperability governance at the district level and explains standards grouped by function. It looks at 9 different areas of interoperability standards. It's intended to show that while there are different kinds of interoperability, they're all part of a much larger animal. And the document organizes standards into the categories. I don't know if you can read them there, but it's digital content, data connectivity, data integration, authentication and ID management, rostering, portals, file sharing, network infrastructure, and of course digital accessibility. The second document is called Working Together to Strategically Connect the K-12 Enterprise. It's a best practice resource. It covers the same 9 areas as the first document, but it's geared for non-technical users. It's less about the alphabet soup of interoperability standards, which are covered in detail in the other document, and it's really designed to help district leaders understand why interoperability standards actually matter. So here's a link if you want to access that. And again, it's free to members and non-members. I can't tell if you're checking email or typing the URL, but I'll move on. Okay, so finally, about the toolkit. We know that education systems are not plug and play. As districts attempt to assemble best-of-breed solution technologies for teaching and learning, they find that educational technology is not delivering on the promise because of the lack of interoperability. So unless we solve this interoperability challenge, the education sector will continue to have siloed data, difficulties in student rostering, inaccuracies in data transfer, end-user frustration in managing multiple logins, unnecessary, costly, expensive retrofitting solutions together, as well as just an inherently inefficient system. The CoSN Toolkit is being developed to help districts as they work to increase interoperability in their digital ecosystems. The goal is to help school systems build environments that provide seamless access to learning resources and enable operational efficiency. In the recent CoSN infrastructure survey, the overwhelming majority of districts said improved data interoperability would help them in a myriad of challenges. Topping the list with 97% are making state and federal reporting more efficient and building better district-level dashboards. Also top on the list are accessing digital content with 95%, scheduling and rostering, 94%, better understanding of the student learning processes with 91%, and rounding off the top, saving money with 89%. You can see the full list on the CoSN 2018-2019 infrastructure survey report. Again, it's another one that's free to all. And I'm just curious, any of the folks here, did you actually partake in the survey? Okay, no one. That's interesting. If you would like to take it, email me if you think your district was missed. We send it out to one district leader, usually the top IT title that we have in our database. We partner with MDR to put that together. So if you feel that if you or somebody in your district didn't complete that survey and you'd like to be part of it, let me know. We'll make sure we can add you to that list. Part of our incentive is that we raffle off a free conference registration to the CoSN annual conference, which this year most of you probably realized was important. So just let me know if you want to get involved in that. But it is a really good resource, and we've had a number of both districts and vendors sort of rely on that for benchmarking within their own district. So the toolkit, what's in it? This is a sneak peek, which basically means it's not done yet, but we do have a pretty full plan on the components. It will be launched in the fall, but as components become available, we are posting them online. One key one, the maturity model, is available now. We're going to spend some time going over that. Other key components are model, RFP language, cost calculator, case studies, and discussion tools. So the goal with the maturity model was to demystify what has been perceived as the 800-pound gorilla, too big to take on. Interoperability can be overwhelming to districts that have technical staff to address it, let alone districts with only 1 or 2 support personnel. We realized that there was a need for a prerequisite to talking about interoperability, a definition of interoperability with real-world meaning, one that districts can use to pinpoint where they are located in the interoperability landscape. We lack a common language to describe what interoperability means for various digital ecosystems. We don't even have a common way to describe those different ecosystems. So while all districts work towards improved student outcomes, the infrastructure they have, the tools they use, the resources they can access, and the student populations they serve vary widely. Without a common framework within which to discuss interoperability, it is difficult to give districts the information they need to make decisions. Without a framework to discuss the topic, we were unable to really move the conversation forward. An interoperability maturity model would enable effective communication not only amongst ourselves, but with publishers, vendors, administrators, and educators. So what's a maturity model? It's basically a systematic framework with structured levels that describes how you basically get from one level to the next to produce reliable and sustainable outcomes. So the first task of our working group was to take a look at some models that already existed. We wanted to make sure that we created a model that was aligned to what was already out there. And we started with ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, for a basic framework, and looked at the key models in the industry. So I know back room can read that, but basically the ISO has a progression from 0, which is basically, they call it incomplete, which is no process implemented or very little evidence of a systemic achievement in the process purpose, through to level 5, which they call optimized. This is where the process is continuously improved to meet relevant current and projected enterprise goals. And you'll see that the first 3 levels, as sort of the warm colors, the red, orange, yellow, mostly relate to punctual processes and basically individual knowledge required to make processes work as expected. And then the more mature levels, the green colors, rely more on enterprise view and knowledge to make different processes and different organizational units work together. And we looked at TIM, the Technology Integration Matrix. Are any of you familiar with this model? I wasn't either at the beginning. One of our committee members said that we should take a look at it. It was developed by the Florida Center for Instructional Technology at the University of South Florida to describe the use of technology to enhancing learning. So if you could actually read the labels, you'd see that their categories are very similar to ISO's. They start with a level that they call entry, and they progress to the transformation level. Are any of you IMS Global members? Are any of you using IMS Global products or services? Well, they do a lot in terms of content interoperability, and we took a look at their K-12 Digital Learning Revolution program. Actually, Jill Hobson from IMS actually provided a walkthrough of their model at one of our meetings. And while they moved away from a tiered framework used by the other organizations, the different facets of the program provide guidance and recommendations on IMS standards to adopt when building a district's digital ecosystem. Their models move from a commitment to use our IMS standard and products through advanced insights and achievements. And then the last model that we looked at was developed by one of our own members, San Francisco Unified School District, obviously one of our largest district members. It was part of their larger change management initiative in their school system. And again, I don't know that you can read that in the back, but they defined 5 levels of progression, and like the other models, they defined attributes that advance from very basic awareness or commitment to full implementation at the enterprise level. And then we wanted to make sure that the model aligned to CoSN's own framework, the Digital Leap Success Matrix. Are any of you familiar with that document? That our CoSN team is. Well, you may want to take a look at it. It's pretty good. The matrix is one of those free resources that CoSN has, and it's essentially an IT planning document focused on the infrastructure and environmental variables that foster equitable and effective use of technology in learning environments. We have one also for just what makes an effective and successful CTO or IT leader, and this kind of takes that same model and applies it to the school system. And anyone that was familiar with that framework will see how the categories that we use to organize interoperability fits within the 3 main categories outlined in the success matrix: leadership and vision, educational environment, and managing technology and business. So I know no one can read this on the slide, but there's a QR code coming up and a URL, so you can download it and have it to read. But I just wanted to show you the end results. We use more detailed descriptions than the other models. You can probably even see in the back of the room. It's kind of copy dense compared to the others. And we are most closely aligned with the San Francisco Unified model, which just focuses on data. And we use many of the same levels, labels for the same levels. And we did decide to mirror their color scheme for the category, just so that there's no reason to reinvent the wheel, and there was some pedagogical alignment to keeping those the same. If we zoom in, you can see that the outline uses 5 levels to describe teaching and learning and operational efficiencies. And again, I don't know that you can read the description certainly from the back of the room, but the model moves from a very initial level where districts are just beginning to use digital resources. Level 2 is emerging, and it describes an environment where you hear some data is used to inform decision making. And then the term most is used in the integrated level, level 3. At level 4, districts are really able to optimize the use of the data, meaning that any data that's needed real time, not that all data is, but data that is, means that it is available. And then ultimately at level 5 is where districts are able to use the technologies in a more transformative way across the enterprise, so not just within a classroom. The categories, the rows of maturity model reuses many of the categories that I mentioned in the CoSN's Digital Leap Success Matrix. Leadership and vision, student outcomes drive the educational vision and strategic use of technology. IT governance, a governance process that is in place for implementing and managing technology. Data governance, controls in place for safeguarding student and staff personal information. Information and systems integration, systems that are integrated and provide each user with functionality that she needs or he needs. And infrastructure, which aligns to industry standards and meets the needs of stakeholders. And note that due to the unique privacy issues required in managing student data, we did break governance into 2 categories so that we could use language that was more specific for data governance versus more general IT governance. And then here's that link. And I just want to share with you before we get to the activity part, a quote by Terry Allen. Terry was a member of the CoSN working group that developed the model. He works in a small rural district in Utah and wears many hats. He sat at the table with districts much larger than his, including Houston ISD, which has hundreds of thousands of students. And basically he says that the term interoperability alone was overwhelming. I believe we didn't have the resources to pursue the concept. While interoperability was the end goal, there are absolutely things I can do to help our district move forward. It was a relief to have something in front of me that helped me to see that we were already on the road to interoperability by what we were doing and the policies that we had in place. So the reason I wanted to share that quote was just really to make the point that districts, regardless of their size and their resources, can do things that can improve interoperability in their ecosystems. It's not an all or nothing. There's things that you could do in various levels to sort of move along the continuum. So this is our activity. If you go to this internet page, you're going to see a short online self-assessment tool. And was everybody able to get there? Did anybody have trouble? Okay, so I'm going to ask everyone to take a few minutes. We'll give it about 5 minutes so that you can review and then, or take a short break, and then we'll discuss. I'll be going around to see where people grouped in terms of the various levels. So it's about 5 minutes. We have just about 1 more minute. there anybody who needs more time? Okay, so note that districts tend not to be at different levels. In the different categories, it's rare that someone's going to be a solid level 2 or solid level 3. And when we did this exercise at FETC in January, we found that most districts are really positioned more at the earlier levels, and I'm kind of wondering what we would find here. So if we could do maybe just by show of hands for those who represent districts, is there anyone who feels they are mostly at a level 5? Okay, yeah, we found that to be the case. Even in fact, San Francisco Unified, which has been working on this for some time, didn't even rate themselves as a number 5. Is there anybody who they feel they're mostly in a 4 range? How about 3? Okay, a couple 3s. How about 2? Okay, that's where most people are. And folks really at the beginning stages, level 1. Okay. Yeah, that is kind of what as I said, is what we found for most of these folks are kind of on the early stages. The next component of the toolkit is a cost calculator. What does a lack of interoperability cost? We all have this sort of tacit knowledge that the lack of interoperability costs districts time and money, and of course time translates into money. And schools bear that financial burden when systems don't seamlessly connect. So in at least one state, Michigan, took a very close look at those costs. Is anyone here familiar with this report? It's the Michigan Data Hub, a Strategic Alignment and ROI Study. Has anyone seen that? Yeah, it really is. It was produced through the state's Technology Readiness Infrastructure Grant. They got funding to do it. It's a great report. It's a comprehensive statewide study on interoperability, and they actually did the math on what the lack of interoperability is costing the state in terms of required personnel effort and technology data management solutions. In that study, they found $61 million per year were being spent on data quality, data completeness, and other data management tasks. $64 million per year were being spent on system connections. $38 million per year were being spent on compliance data submissions. And in total, it represented district expenditures of upward of $163 million per year. CoSN was not involved in the study. I just happened to attend a CETA webinar when the results were presented, and it really just served as the inspiration to create a tool that would help districts at least start to ballpark what are the costs of the lack of interoperability, either from existing systems that they have or when they start to vet new products, what were the costs of getting them integrated. So what often happens is there's a wonderful product from the curriculum side, but it's not really very interoperable, and to make it work, there are major considerations. So we want to be able to have a tool that would help districts manage that. So I don't have a URL link to that, but I'm sure you can find it if you Google it. It really was a great study. And we first started with a spreadsheet, really just sort of because it's a calculation, and but we found in battle testing it that we found that it was a little too easy to mess up the calculations and the formulas, and there were some folks, especially from the very small districts, who weren't tech Excel cuties, and they quote-unquote found it scary. So it was suggested, and we decided to make an interactive tool that was more question-based, that would automatically omit the fields that users didn't need. The tool was developed in partnership with the firm DoubleLine, and they were the same firm that worked with Michigan on their ROI study. So they weren't just our developers, they served as reviewers of the tool as well, and they provided feedback to the committee. We had hoped to go live in time for this conference, but we didn't quite make it, so it looks like it will be next week, but I made a few screen grabs, and I'll share them with you so you can just get a sense of the simplicity of that tool versus this Uber spreadsheet here. It basically just starts asking a question. What are the systems pairing that you're looking to connect? There's a pull-down menu LMS to courseware, LMS to SIS, and a number of the most common pairings. We did a survey to find out what those common pairings were, and so we built those into the toolkit. And then very basic, we asked for estimating purposes, what are your hourly rates for IT leaders? If your IT leader is your only staff, then you don't have to fill out the staff level. Admins, teachers, anybody who would be involved in sort of either entering data or in any way be involved with the system, what was their rates, so we could calculate it as you go further on. We did want to highlight, I don't know if you can see it in the back of the room, but the big circle there is a disclaimer that no information is stored or copied in the use of this tool. We wanted to be very clear about that. We're not capturing anything. We're not doing any data analytics from a higher level. We didn't want anyone to feel hesitant about putting their data in, worried that they may look like they're spending too much, or that we were looking up what they were paying their teachers. So we just wanted very clear, this is your tool. DoubleLine doesn't collect it. We don't collect it. It's really just meant for you to start to get a handle on what some of these costs are. And then we ask, how will you, if it's a product that you're vetting, or how did you, if you're trying to analyze existing tools, is your vendor handling the integration? Are you hiring a consultant to manage it? Are you building custom integrations in-house? And we're actually going to add another one that you'll see in the final, which is custom provided API from your vendor. We ask questions. Is there a one-time fee for setting up single sign-on? Are there recurring fees for maintaining single sign-on? Is there a one-time fee to set up rostering? And you kind of get the idea. We sort of work through some basic questions. We ask things about training, just to kind of capture where are those costs of implementing a new system that isn't interoperable. What are those extra costs? And then at the end, we provide a summary page, basically to give a ballpark to make two systems interoperate. Some costs are just for one time, for an initial implementation. Costs for staff training will likely be less in lower years. And so the costs are really just an estimate for that initial year. They're not meant to be an average yearly cost or total cost of ownership, but just sort of initial, okay, what is this going to really take? One thing that was sort of interesting when we were testing this online tool, one reviewer suggested that we create an Excel document. So, definitely a case where different strokes for different folks. So the toolkit is going to include both versions. Obviously, the online version is very simple. It's just a series of questions, yes, no. The only please you have to put in on the calculations are really just your fees that you want to calculate for different stakeholders. But the Excel version certainly allows for much greater customization, and anybody who's comfortable with Excel and wants to do a more deep dive, maybe add some other fields in there, that will be available too. But at least you don't have to start from scratch. The next component is about RFP language. Getting good, consistent answers when working with vendors can be a problem for districts. And so a basic tool that we thought would provide some immediate impact is just simply a development of a standard set of questions for vendors. The idea is that districts can cut and paste questions that are relevant to their situations and put them into their RFIs and RFP documents. The tool will help districts address key issues that affect their budget. Interoperability, for example, versus integration. There's a big difference between those two. And requests for proposals are really the key mechanism for incentivizing vendors to adopt use of standards. So the more that folks ask for them, the vendors will do what their customers want. And so the more that ask for it, the more incentive it is for them to do that. And so increasingly, districts are adding these kind of requirements in their RFPs, but they're each drafting new and unique proposals from scratch. And though every district's ecosystem may be unique, the language to describe the requirements for particular standards doesn't necessarily have to be. So a model RFP language would certainly save time and would maximize limited resources and help avoid certainly errors of omissions. And not least is consistent verbiage would also help vendors because they have to plow through this on their side. So consistent language would also help them. So this is our next activity, and this will take about 10 minutes. I didn't realize there'd be quite so many, so I only have a couple handouts. If everyone can't see from that can't read from the room, I do have some handouts I'll do from the back, which is basically a series of questions. You know, how does your district address interoperability in your RFPs? Do you talk about open standards? In general, what do you see the role of standards in the interoperability challenge, and what methods do you currently use for software integration data exchange? There are a number of platforms that can handle that for you. And when you think about EdTech suppliers, I don't know if Google is still in the room, but what advice would you give them? So we'll take about 10 minutes, and I'll hand out some printouts that I have for those in the back who probably can't read this. And then we'll go around the tables and ask you to sort of report out, not necessarily on all those questions, but the ones that most resonated with you.
So it has the narrow
our expectation is that work in collaboration, so that front end where they're they start talking about that.
I'm not going to tell you what I am going to tell you. You're looking at you may end up making a professional judgment, taking a break. If that's the case, then we'll but we don't, it's not a deal breaker. I don't have the authority to say that solution not great. But I do, look, if you go with that,
You're doing a better job.
yeah. So we can't really, we couldn't get this. But we're talking about and bringing it to specific. But again, you decide that's the right answer. So that we'll figure out how to do it. That's be a part of your decision.
I think there's, you know, pretty well together. I think initially, technical background. If you look at the report card, and they would get serious
Fiction. So we have that means that every student or staff
said that they
just telling you that's a totally business. So but you think it's worth it, the district has, we'll take it on. We're telling you right now, I'm every time we talk about it. But we went ahead and got it.
That's the 7th grade. You're lucky it's
And I've actually had conversations with our industry about some of the generations when they pitch themselves
not a lot of nonprofits. It's just a very weird.
but we do still apply.
So it wouldn't be money.
We know going out,
I understand that as well.
but and it's a part of that bigger decision. That's sometimes the value trade-off. There have been things that we go, oh, we don't integrate with that. It's awesome. It's not that much different. It's not that much better. But one thing that said to our curriculum right now, I don't care how good the resource is, kids and staff need to do it. I don't care how good it is, it's good, it's worth it.
They want to
Oh yeah.
That they do some kind of vetting on and decide but they don't bring in and frankly that's why
Oh, we use their one roster. So
they create their own roster every single well, they're all how they are. Those 14
that is a whole different problem. Yeah.
If they collect personally identified information, what is it that they say they will? You
2 more minutes? Okay. Is there anyone who would like to talk from their table about that sort of first question about how you're currently, or if you are addressing interoperability in your RFIs and RFPs? Is there anybody doing that now, or anybody want to talk about what they'd like to be doing? Go ahead. Oh.
I'll just
You shout, use your teacher voice.
So Beaverton, I'd actually love to get involved in that before the purchase is actually made. So usually we're involved in it from an IT perspective. We've gone out and bought this package now. How are you going to integrate it for us? Because in about a week we have PD scheduled. Right.
Yeah, that's typical. We've heard that. Yeah.
Please roster it. We're trying to get there, working with our purchasing department to not allow purchases to go forward. Working with the Data Privacy Consortium on that.
Yeah, one of CoSN's other surveys, IT Leadership Survey, we asked how many are the IT leaders involved in the purchasing, before the purchasing of EdTech, and increasingly we're seeing that they, in some cases, I don't remember the percentage offhand, but there's an increasing number of those where EdTech cannot be purchased without the approval of the CTO or IT leader, so that we thought was a good, rather than finding out after the fact how to implement it. Was there anybody else who wanted to say something about their RFP process?
We've actually gotten really good. Our curriculum director does involve our IT staff in the conversation early on and fairly often during adoption. One of the things that does make it a little bit different, though, is that we don't have a veto power. We just provide input. We say, look, if you want to do this, here's what this will take. It's either going to be very difficult or very easy, or it's going to cost something, or students are going to have to learn a whole different login process, or we might even have to purchase additional hardware, but we don't have that. That is just input for the decision. It then kind of goes back to the adoption committee and reviews and says, well, it's worth it, or it's not worth it. But it's not a veto power, but we definitely have input early on and various times along the way. And there have been times when it's turned out both ways, where my input has been enough for them to say, forget it, we're not going that route, and forget it, Kurt, it's actually, I don't care how hard it is, it's worth it that we have this, so sorry, you're going to have to figure out how to make it as elegant as possible.
To kind of combat, or recognizing that that's a case for many districts, is part of the rationale behind that cost calculator. Because if you use an Excel sheet or the online version, you'll now have some numbers to say, hey, this is great. We want recognize that it's what your teachers want. It's just really great pedagogy. but heads up, this is what it's gonna be, versus something else that is all more interoperable. So that's just a way to talk dollars, and people really pay attention to that. So this is just sort of a way to quickly kind of get a ballpark estimate. So is that scenario similar to other folks as well, where you have input but you really can't veto? Okay. So the next question, in RFPs, is anybody specifying standards? We had a great sidebar conversation by the coffee cart there, which I think I recorded accidentally on an open mic, so you'll probably get it online later. But the idea was around standards, and that's really where the rubber hits the road. Is there anybody who is specifying? I mentioned IMS, but there's Ed5, which actually I didn't mention on the RIs today. That's what they've standardized on terms of managing their data back and forth. Is there anyone who's specifying a specific standard in their in any of their requests?
I mean, just within ours, we're
You're Beaverton, right?
Yeah, Beaverton. We're just trying to use one roster or a Clever, whatever the most common is that we have in the district.
Okay. Yeah. One roster seems to be. Although when we started this first committee, I was last year to talk around the interoperability model. One person at the table hadn't even heard of one roster. Where now I think it's more and more it's becoming a de facto standard, perhaps. I don't know. There's also Express roster out there. At one point in the model, we did specify standards, and then we sort of backed away from that. And again, we recognize that's the rub, but CoSN, at least up to this point, has been standards neutral. Project Unicorn also is standards neutral. We've been sort of hesitant. Something like that might change in the future, but for now, however it works for the district, but our focus has been on what is it you're trying to do. And so the belief is as we all push for what we wanted to do, the standards will evolve. So it's kind of a backup, in terms of role of standards in solving the interoperability challenge. You mentioned Clever, which really isn't a standard, but it's one of those platforms that we're seeing is a way to for districts, especially smaller ones, they'll handle the integration mapping and getting your data. The issue sometimes is getting the two-way data. That's usually the rub. Does anyone have that issue where they can't get their data back out from a vendor? Okay. Right now, what methods are you using for integration? We mentioned Clever. Is there anybody else using Clever or one of the other platforms out there? Okay, a couple hands. Are any of you doing custom integrations in-house? Do you have tech support for that? Okay, some head noddings there. Yeah, and that's kind of costly. Okay. Have you done an ROI analysis? Anyone who's been doing custom integrations? What that costs? Okay, well maybe the calculator will help you to do that. And the Google gentleman left the room, which is a shame, because the question is, what advice would you have for tech suppliers? What do you really, what would you like them to do? Does anybody have if you had a chance to talk at a vendor conference, what would you tell them? Either about content interoperability or just getting your data for state reporting. Did anybody talk about that?
We talked about everybody standardizing mostly on one roster, but how the vendor handles that one roster file is dramatically different from vendor to vendor, and some sort of standards on the application side of what we should expect on how this data is being used, because you can have 5 different vendors, and when you upload that file, they interpret the data 5 different ways. So it's really hard for us. It's easy to upload it, but how duplicate students are handled within a class or multiple classrooms, how students are removed from classes is all completely different, and it really changes how you set up the data to pass it. So.
I'm seeing some head nodding. Any other comments about that?
Well, one thing yes. There's that. One roster is really important, but the other thing that I look for, especially when we're looking at curriculum review that has a lot of online platform usage, please don't create your own login method. Pick something that is common, SAML, Google, Microsoft, one of those 3, and we're good. Just stop doing it on your own, because anybody who does it on their own gets a big thumbs down.
Okay. And do you have a vetting process where you look at that before?
We do. We have veto power. I mean, we can be unvetoed, but I know that sounds silly, but it's like if it's really, really important to them, I'm like, look, you guys are on your own if you do it. End of story. I understand, so we're thankful that we're on the table now with curriculum instruction, and we do the technology review before the teachers even see it for their the actual curriculum review and adoption process. And we work hard to eliminate items that we just can't support. Because if we can't support it, it's hard on them, and they won't use the content. And isn't that the point?
Right. I forget which of the organizations, but they have a whole resource around Get Your Sundays Back, and it's all about teachers not having to manually enter data.
Exactly, and we want to give that time back to them. They shouldn't have to do that.
Yeah, it's not a value add at all.
One of the things that we've actually encountered a number of times is where an individual teacher or a small group of teachers will pre-adopt something on their own, and they'll handle their own manual roster maintenance, if you will, and then after it's then gone to a grander scale and we've adopted it and we've built up the integration, then we get constructive feedback from those small group of people who were, look, my 30 kids, when I was doing it myself, I could actually put them in 3 different classes in the other system, and now that you're doing it, it's forcing them all into a single class. I actually wish you hadn't helped me. And beside all the people who are thankful that we helped them. So there's that kind of forcing of the integration that may put constrictions in place that weren't obvious in the first place.
Yeah, most of it, everything in life seems to come down to communication, people understanding the implications. Are folks running into sort of like that free app syndrome where they'll, everybody's sort of nodding their heads there.
It's mission critical after that.
Yeah, and there's a whole issue around privacy, and I can't remember what district had talked about it, but what they did was sort of an education. Everybody understands about data privacy. Amy said, she's going to be working on some research around that, but everyone sort of understands the importance of that. And what teachers may not understand is that they're really putting their student data at risk. And one district had said, if you are signing this, click sign agreement, you are taking the responsibility for that. So that kind of backed people off to say, hey, if you're interested in it, by all means, send it to us and we'll look at it and vet it. We can even work with vendors. A lot of the startups aren't necessarily even aware of these kinds of things. They come from different sectors and don't realize the importance of protecting student data in a special way. But that was one of the techniques, was to have teachers understand what they're really agreeing to and what the risk they are putting their students at, and then it's on them, kind of like then you're on your own. So that kind of stopped folks just signing up saying, oh, it doesn't matter, I'll just do this on my own. Was there anything else before we move on about recommendations that's worked in your district? Okay. So then the next piece is really just the RFP language. We're really looking at reviewing sample language that's not only used by our members, but members from other organizations, to kind of put the best of breed resources in the toolkit. We feel that there's no reason for everyone to sort of reinvent the wheel. We're actually, even next, I think it's in June, we're actually going to be meeting with the Software and Information Industry Association. Are any of you familiar with that organization? They're an industry side, so the McGraw-Hills of the world, the Googles of the world, that's there are the members, and we're working with them because we want to get their perspective and from their membership as well. We recognize that it's going to take efforts from both sides to move the dial on interoperability, and we find that it's a little bit easier for them as well. They get different proposals, and kind of sorting out what is it they're looking for is hard for them. So we want to make sure that they have a voice at the table. And then, so here's my contact information, so that if there's any language that you've used, please send it my way. We're collecting everything. We really want to kind of have a sort of a best of breed scenario for everyone to kind of cut and paste what they need. What's the language that works well, and then critically, what are the things about omissions that you don't want to miss something. Or what we've heard from some vendors is folks are asking for things and it's almost a word scramble, and they're not things that are being asked for could even be done. So we just want to make sure that what we're asking for is going to deliver you the results that you want, and then on the vendor side is something that we can incentivize them to do by having a group kind of make that push. In the hallway, we were talking about Houston ISD, and they're 200,000 students. I mean, they're a huge, huge district, and they are able to demand certain things because a vendor is. They're not going to want to lose that sale, so they're going to make it work. And there was one case in one of our committee meetings. They were talking about academic standards, just the tagging. It wasn't interoperability standards, the tagging standards, but it was done incorrectly. So when they poured it, in, things were not aligning the way that they should, and it was a major problem. At the end of the day, the CTO just called the president of the McGraw-Hill division, and she had it resolved in 2 days. So smaller districts are not going to be able to do that. But what we do want to be able to do is leverage the power of those large districts. So San Francisco and Houston, so we can kind of, the smaller districts, if they're using the same language that the larger districts are using, we can kind of, or my belief is that we can move that dial and have them integrate, create the standards, use the standards that will help us as opposed to custom integrations. So anyway, if you have language or the specific language that you need help with, let us know. We'll collect everything. The next piece of the toolkit are these case studies. We're going to have one for each level. We know there isn't a flip the switch solution to complex and interconnected problems surrounding interoperability. So we finished interviewing 5 IT leaders from districts that represent kind of those 5 levels of interoperability maturity. And the goal is that we hope these real-world snapshots are going to put together a process of interoperability in context and help other districts see how they can advance towards increased interoperability. I did that quote already from Terry from Utah, and I have some quotes that I pulled from some other interviews from CTOs that I just wanted to share because I think they'll speak to we've got this very snappy looking maturity model, but what does that really look like? How do you really get from one place to another, and what are the challenges that are being faced? So one is from Melissa Temmenkamp. We have a term that we call is efficiently lazy. We have a lot of demands on our time, and we have a lot of data that we work with. And so the only way for us to manage that is for us to actually not manage it. We don't do things manually, and our drive is not ever to want to do something manually that has moved to us automating everything. And Raytown is classified as an urban district, but it doesn't really fit the typical profile. It's 8 to 18 schools are physically within Kansas City's boundaries. Some are rather deep into the city's urban core. It's almost 9,000 students. They speak roughly 40 different languages. And on top of that, the school system student body is highly transient, giving the district a total transient rate of about 30%. So that really speaks to why they needed to automate. They couldn't manually manage that level of transient. The next is from Chris Hagel. Constant change in leadership makes for real challenge in keeping plans going. Initiatives and strategic goals, because everyone that comes in and everybody that leaves has a very different point of view on where you should be, so that makes it difficult. Until everyone's talking and thinking about the same lines around good teaching and learning tool looks like, it's really hard to have a deeper conversation about what the things are that we need to facilitate good teaching and learning. One of those being data interoperability and data analysis. And so Chris's district is in Gig Harbor, which isn't all that far from Amazon's Seattle headquarters, but next level technology advances in Peninsula have been pretty much slow to come by. While each student in grades 5 to 12 has some sort of device, he said that most likely have an iPad or Chromebook, but many schools have just started giving students the devices just a few months ago. So He also, although it's not in this quote, but you'll see in the full case study, he did talk about, he'd done a presentation, I think in 2006, and he was sort of disheartened that in 2019 we're still having the same conversation. So. The next one is we're sending rosters all over the place. Data in SIS was much more public, and that led to data quality conversation. Aligning with our 2017 bond, we made concerted effort to define what does it mean to be digitally expanded, to digitally expand. And we put a lot of process and structures in place that really kind of exponentially accelerated our digital transformation to where we are today with a robust learning management system and personalized instruction. Christina comes from Spring Branch, which is an enclave in Houston, Texas. It's predominantly Hispanic and poor. They share some of their tax revenue with other districts in the Lone Star State that are even poorer. And it's a big district. It educates more than 35,000 students each year, and it's spread over 50 schools. And then the last quote, it's from Pete Just. It's pretty exciting because what we're learning is we can share with other districts, and some of them can jump ahead of us since they're smaller and leaner. Wayne Township is in Indiana. They instruct over 16,000 students a year, and it's in a state that's not known for spending. Nearly 80% of the student body qualifies for free and reduced price lunch. And Pete's comment really just sort of sums up this whole toolkit effort, sharing knowledge and experiences so that others can leverage it. Really, I mean, I think that's the purpose of this organization and CoSN and others like it. It really is, how do we leverage what other people have gone through? You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to live through that process. You can sort of jump ahead and leverage what other people have done. So the last piece is discussion tools. Interoper what? Communication technology often is our biggest challenge, and outside of IT, interoperability really is an unfamiliar term. CoSN is going to be creating some resources, both graphics and slides, that can be used by CTOs to help them talk about interoperability to superintendents, administrators, and educators, parents, and other community stakeholders to explain its impact on student outcomes and district effectiveness. It's not just talking to ourselves, but also if you've got parents very concerned about student data, when you talk about interoperability and the data to easy to move data back and forth, that from an IT perspective is very useful, but from a parent perspective, it might seem very scary. You know, who are these people that have my student data? I don't want it to move so easily. So you need to have some tools to enable to talk to that constituency, as well as to your superintendents. One of the resources that CoSN has is the Empowered Superintendent. And there are a series of one-page sheets that talk about different topics, and we'll be creating one just for them so that the superintendent can understand the issues as well. We know that everyone has to put together PowerPoints, so it's at some point, and with over 14,000 districts, that's a lot of slides. So we're just hoping that the tools that we can create can reduce the effort so that IT leaders can put some time towards more value-added activity. And like the RFP solution, there's really no need for everyone to reinvent the wheel. There's certainly tools you can customize it, but if there's some way that you want to explain rostering, there's only so many ways that you can do that. So let's just have a one-stop shop for everyone. Is there anybody in this group that has some slides to talk about interoperability? Has that come up in any of your meetings, either to internally or externally? Okay. So the toolkit itself, it's not going to be an actual kit. It's going to be accessible online. We are redesigning the CoSN website, but basically it will be a source where you can access one-stop shop. So the maturity model, the cost calculator, those standards documents that we talked about, case studies, the RFPs, and those discussion tools. So when we want to have a place that you can we'll have a URL and you can access everything online at a point where you need to. We'll also have a series of blogs as people, we're focusing on those first 5. But as you move along, if you have a story that you want to share, you don't have to be a CoSN member. In fact, some of those people that we interviewed are not CoSN members. But we do want to highlight, we feel that often folks, what happens in Houston isn't, that only speaks to very few people. So we really want to make sure that we are representing different districts, different populations, different challenges. So we feel that's really important. As I said earlier, CoSN doesn't endorse, at least at this point, any particular standards, but in those case studies, they do talk about, hey, we used EdFi, and this is how we move that along, or we use the IMS, and this is how we moved along. So they do talk about the standards, although we still have a standard neutral approach. And then the toolkit schedule. Right now, as you saw, the maturity model is live. There's that PDF, and then that online assessment tool that you all went online. The cost calculator, as I said, we had hoped would be, at least the online version would be available this week, but it looks like it'll be next week. And we're going to launch that and the Excel version at the same time, so you'll probably get a PR announcement on that. The case studies, we finished our interviews. And we're in the process of getting those sort of vetted and proofread and designed. So they'll be coming out in June. And as I said, there'll be one for each level. Again, very few districts is going to be completely in one particular level. So it will be mostly level 3 or mostly level 4. But you can get a sense of what that looks like and how they've sort of managed to get from one stage to the other. And then those model RFPs. We're sort of scheduling that for August. And I do encourage you, if there's any language that you want to share, or are there any specific issues that you're dealing with now, you have my contact information. We can see what's out there. We have those big districts and small districts, and some have really solved these problems. So there's no reason for us to sort of reinvent that wheel.
Paula?
Yes.
Are you on the ACPE mailing list?
I probably will be now.
So that is.
Yep.
I was just going to say that the ACPE mailing list is like one of the most awesome resources that I have ever had a chance to see. And so if you are looking for examples for the RFP, I would put the request out on there, and I'm sure that you'll find just some outstanding districts that can provide some feedback, in addition to the folks in this room.
Thank you for that. CoSN also has, for those of you who are members, CoSN also has something similar. They have a sort of a, I think it was CoSN Network, I'm not sure. That is just for members, but it's the same kind of thing where folks will say, hey, I'm buying a kind of screener you're using, interactive screen, any kind of questions up there. So it's the same kind of thing. So yes, that's what we'll do, and I'll exploit this list as well. Thank you. And then the full toolkit will be launched in October. But we decided there was really no reason to hold off, and since we're, from a production standpoint, we're launching them at different points. We're not doing everything simultaneously, so there's no reason not to post them as they're ready. But the full launch and the big hay that we made around it will be in October. So thank you. You have my contact information for pretty much anything. And I guess really, are there other questions or things that that didn't come up or that you feel that should be included in a toolkit? Now's your time.
I have a question.
In the case studies that you're showing, are you actually going to be going into detail into what kinds of interoperability tools the higher level districts are using?
In some cases, yes. So we don't specifically, through the interview process, we didn't specifically say outline exactly everything that you're using, but many did talk about the specific standards that they were using and the vendors that we're using. In some cases, we sort of pulled out some vendor names. We were just concerned that we would never put anybody negatively, but we did pull out some vendor names. So we didn't specify, Clever, for example, any kind of those brand names, for example, but where they did specify a standard that they were using or how they requested to work with a vendor, that was highlighted. So it gives you some detail. And again, going forward, just sort of starting with these 5 case studies, but we certainly envision that this wouldn't be a static tool, that as more, again, volunteer-wise, CoSN members and non-CoSN members, if you wanted to highlight what was happening in your district, we'll have an opportunity to do that going forward. Okay, so you have about 15 minutes left. There's coffee on the outside, and thank you very much for taking your morning session to talk about interoperability.